My name is Warda, and I was 28 years old when I died for the first time. It happened on September 12th, 2017, inside a palace chamber lined with gold, marble, and shadows that had watched me suffer since childhood. I remember the exact moment my heartbeat faltered, not gradually, not gently, but like a door slammed shut inside my chest. 1 second I was breathing, the next I was clawing at the silk cushions beneath me, trying to pull air into lungs that refused to obey. A metallic taste spread across my tongue, sharp and bitter, and my vision fractured into violent streaks of red and black. It felt as if someone had poured fire into my veins. The poison worked fast, too fast. My fingers curled without my permission, my legs jerked uncontrollably, and my throat collapsed into a strangled gasp that echoed off the marble walls. My own mother stood only a few feet away, watching with the cold stillness of a statue. Her face didn't fold with fear or grief. Instead, her eyes followed every spasm of my body with terrifying calm, as if she had been waiting years for this moment to happen. I tried to reach toward her, maybe for mercy, maybe for understanding, but my arm wouldn't lift. It shook violently and fell uselessly against my side. The world was shrinking, pulling inward like a whirlpool, dragging me into its center. I could hear my heart pounding, no, hammering inside my ears, so loud it drowned out the room around me. Then, abruptly, it skipped, once, twice, then stopped altogether. A cold silence filled my chest. Panic erupted inside my mind. I wasn't ready. I wanted to live. I didn't want to die alone on that floor like an animal being put down. Darkness crawled up my vision, blotting out the chandelier above me, swallowing the walls, swallowing my mother's shape, swallowing everything except the terror trapped inside of me. I felt myself slipping, like falling backward into a deep black sea with no surface to break through. My last breath was thin and broken, a small whimper of a girl who had never been allowed to choose anything, not even the moment of her own death. As my consciousness tore away from my body, I felt a scream form inside my mind, not from my lips. God, if you are real, don't let me die like this. I don't know how he heard me, or how my silent plea reached beyond the veil of death, but the instant the darkness swallowed me whole, something happened that no human words can fully describe. Just when the world disappeared, a light stronger than death itself tore through the blackness. And in that radiant explosion, I realized this was not the end of my life, this was the beginning of everything. Long before the night poison scorched its way through my body, my life had already been quietly suffocating under layers of gold and expectation. People imagine that being born into Saudi royalty means freedom, privilege, and endless luxury. But for me, it was a beautiful cage, one so polished, so exquisite, that most people would never notice the bars. My earliest memories were of marble floors that were always cold beneath my small bare feet, and corridors so long they seemed to stretch into eternity. Servants bowed when I passed, their eyes lowered, their voices gentle but distant. They treated me with reverence, yet not one of them ever spoke to me as if I were a child who needed comfort. I was a symbol, an ornament, a fragile piece of our family's perfect image. Even as a little girl, I understood that tenderness was a luxury no one in the palace knew how to offer. My mother's hands were always immaculate, perfectly manicured, adorned with diamonds, but they were never warm. She corrected me more than she touched me, shaping me like clay meant for display, not for love. A princess must not show weakness, she would say while adjusting the crease of my prayer garment. Control your voice, your posture, your thoughts. Allah sees everything. I remember nodding even when I didn't understand. Fear became the air I breathed, so constant that I didn't know it was fear at all. I only knew that if I mispronounced a Quranic verse, my mother's fingers would tighten painfully around my shoulder, guiding me back into perfect obedience. By the time I was a teenager, my faith was no longer faith, it was performance. Every dawn we stood together on the prayer rugs, the palace still dark and silent around us. My mother always positioned herself behind me, so close I could feel her breath on my neck. Even now, I can hear the echo of our footsteps on the marble as we walk to the prayer room, the sound cold and rhythmic, like marching toward a judgment I could never escape. While I recited the Quran, my voice trembling with the pressure to be flawless, I often wondered why the words felt so heavy. Why did they fall from my lips like stones instead of like water? Why did they never bring comfort, only fear? But those were questions I never dared to voice. In the palace, silence was safer than honesty. My father was rarely home, but when he was, his presence filled every room like a storm cloud. He spoke in clipped tones about politics, alliances, family honor. My siblings and I would sit quietly at the dining table while he dissected the kingdom's affairs, never once looking up long enough to notice our anxious eyes. I often felt invisible in his world, except when I risked disappointing him. Then his disappointment was like thunder, unavoidable, echoing, terrifying. By adulthood, I had become a master at appearing perfect. My closets overflowed with silk gowns and embroidered abayas, each one chosen not by me but for me. My jewelry boxes were full of pieces worth more than entire neighborhoods, yet every gem felt like an anchor pulling me deeper into a role I never wanted. Even the perfume I wore was selected by my mother. Fragrances she said matched the kind of daughter I should be. Soft, obedient, controlled. People think wealth brings choices, but I never chose anything. Not my clothes, not my prayers, not my path, not even my thoughts. At night, while the palace slept, I would lie awake under the glow of the chandelier, tracing invisible cracks on the ceiling with my eyes. The silence felt heavier than the gold adorning my shelves. I would ask myself questions that felt dangerous, treacherous even. Why do I feel nothing when I pray? Why does Allah seem so distant? Why does my heart feel hollow when my life is supposedly full? But the question that haunted me most was simple. Why do I feel so unloved? Ramadan always brought those feelings to a breaking point. The fasting, the rituals, the rules, none of it healed the ache inside me. We would gather at sunset around elaborately arranged tables filled with dishes worthy of royalty, yet inside I felt emptier than my own untouched plate. My mother would lecture me about purification, piety, righteousness, while I felt myself shrinking under expectations I could never meet. She talked about closeness to Allah, but I had never felt farther from Him. I remember sitting at those grand feasts, the smell of spiced rice and roasted lamb filling the air, wondering why my soul felt like a desert. Why did everyone else seem content with rituals that left me starving inside? Why did I feel like I was praying to a locked door? Have you ever felt that way, surrounded by everything the world says should make you happy, yet unable to silence the ache inside your chest? That was my life, a silent ache hidden beneath silk and diamonds. A princess on the outside, but inside, a girl drowning in loneliness no one could see. I didn't know it then, but the emptiness inside me was not a curse, it was a hunger for a love I had never known. A hunger that would eventually lead me straight to the arms of the one who created me. As I grew older, the palace that had once felt merely cold began to feel predatory, as if its walls were leaning closer each day, listening for any trace of rebellion. My mother's gaze sharpened with each passing year, as though she could sense the quiet questions growing inside me, the invisible cracks spreading across the perfect image she had spent her whole life sculpting. She noticed everything, every hesitation in my prayer, every shift in my breathing, every flicker of doubt that crossed my eyes. It was as if she could smell disobedience the way others smell perfume. She began appearing in places she had never bothered to visit before. If I went to the library, she would suddenly walk in with a fabricated reason. If I stepped into the garden to breathe fresh air, she would emerge moments later, pretending she happened to be passing by. I once caught her standing in the shadow of a doorway at 3 a.m, watching me as I walked to the bathroom. She didn't speak. She just stared, her eyes following me like a hunter tracking prey. My days became a series of silent inspections. She would adjust my veil, straighten my posture, press her thumb into my lower back if I slouched even slightly. Whenever I closed my eyes during prayer, I could feel her standing behind me, close enough that her breath warmed my neck. And if my voice wavered, she would dig her nails into my shoulder until tears blurred the Arabic text before me. Again, she would whisper, "Properly." Fear became a second spine inside my body, rigid, unyielding, always present. The servants, once neutral, now watched me with the same tight-lipped caution they reserved for my mother. They could sense the tension, the growing pressure, as if the air itself knew something inside me was shifting. Even the palace guards seemed to observe me with suspicion, their eyes lingering too long as I walked past. My world grew smaller. Corridors I once wandered freely now felt hostile. Windows that once offered glimpses of sunlight now resembled bars. I learned to walk silently, breathe quietly, think without moving my lips, because any slip, any sign of internal struggle could become ammunition in my mother's hands. My anxiety sharpened into something physical. At night, my heart hammered so loudly against my ribs that I feared someone would hear it through the door. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it brought nightmares, dark figures whispering verses I could not escape, or visions of myself trapped inside labyrinths of marble with no exit. I woke each morning exhausted, but my mother expected perfection, so perfection I became. I recited the Quran until my throat ached. I memorized passages until the words blurred together into meaningless syllables. Each day felt like running on a treadmill toward an unreachable horizon. But the harder I tried to maintain the image she demanded, the more I felt something inside me breaking. And the palace responded to those fractures with increasing hostility. My mother's lectures about Islamic purity grew harsher, more pointed. She warned me of the corrupting influence of foreign ideas, even though I had never left the palace without permission. She reminded me that the honor of our family rested on my obedience. Her voice, once merely strict, took on an edge I had never heard before, sharp enough to wound even when she spoke softly. My father, still consumed by political affairs, barely noticed the tension building around me. But the few times he did glance in my direction, it was with an unsettling mixture of suspicion and disappointment, as though he sensed I was drifting away from the faith he believed defined our entire family. I felt trapped in a tightening fist. Every attempt to breathe seemed to provoke another layer of scrutiny. My world became a suffocating loop of fear, ritual, and silence. The more I longed for answers, the more forbidden they became. And the palace, my golden prison, felt more alive than ever, as though it were conspiring with my mother to crush any spark of freedom inside me. There were moments when I stood alone in my room, staring at my reflection, wondering who I was becoming. My eyes looked haunted, my shoulders hunched under invisible weight. My voice, once soft but steady, now trembled even when I spoke simple sentences. I wasn't just losing myself. I was disappearing, and deep inside, something whispered that this escalating oppression wasn't random. It was the precursor to something greater, something terrifying. My mother wasn't simply monitoring me. She was hunting the truth she suspected was forming inside me, a truth neither of us fully understood yet. And the closer I came to confronting that truth, the more dangerous her determination would become. I didn't know it then, but the oppression gathering around me was not the end of my suffering. It was only the beginning of a storm that would nearly take my life. The day everything finally shattered did not arrive with warning. It came quietly, disguising itself as an ordinary afternoon sunlight pooling through the palace windows, servants moving with their usual silent precision, my mother humming softly under her breath as she arranged a silver tray of tea. I should have sensed something. Her calmness was too perfect, too controlled. The way she watched me as I entered the room felt like a blade pressing gently against my spine, but I was tired of suspicion, tired of fear, tired of being a daughter molded into something I no longer recognized. So when she offered me a delicate porcelain cup, steam rising gently from its surface, I accepted it without question. The first sip tasted normal sweet mint with a hint of rosewater. It wasn't until the cup touched my lips a second time that I noticed the faint bitterness beneath the sweetness, a sharpness that didn't belong. My mother's eyes flicked to the cup, then back to my face, her expression unreadable. Within minutes, the world tilted. The walls warped, stretching and contracting as though the palace itself were breathing. My stomach twisted violently, my throat constricted, and a cold sweat broke across my skin. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick and useless. When I rose from my cushion, my legs buckled beneath me. The floor rose up to meet my cheek with a force that made my ears ring. I heard my mother's voice calling for the servants, but there was no panic in her tone, only disappointment. As my vision flickered, I saw her standing above me, her shadow stretching long and dark across the marble. She didn't kneel. She didn't touch me. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She simply turned her face away, as if watching me struggle was an embarrassment she refused to acknowledge. They carried me to my room. Doctors rushed in. Lights flickered. Needles pierced my arms. Voices blurred into a single trembling hum. But nothing they did stopped the agony tearing through my insides. For 3 days, I drifted between consciousness and blackout, vomiting until my throat bled, shaking so violently the bed rattled against the wall. Each time I opened my eyes, I saw my mother sitting in the corner, reading Quranic verses in a low monotone. Not once did she look at me with concern. Her gaze was distant, almost irritated, like my suffering was an inconvenience. And somewhere deep inside me, a terrifying realization took root. She didn't want me to recover. On the 4th night, I woke gasping, the room spinning wildly. My chest tightened, each breath thinner than the last. I tried to call for help, but only a faint rasp escaped my lips. Panic exploded inside me. I clawed at the sheets, trying to anchor myself, but they slipped through my fingers. My heart hammered erratically too fast, too fragile. The air felt thick, heavy, impossible to swallow. Tears blurred my vision until the chandelier above me dissolved into streaks of fractured light. I wasn't sure if I was dying or if death had already begun to claim me. In that moment, something inside me finally broke. Not softly, not like a crack spreading slowly through glass. It shattered violently every illusion of safety, every belief that obedience might protect me, every hope that my mother loved me despite her harshness. They all disintegrated at once. I realized something horrifying. I could not trust the woman who gave me life to keep me alive. My breath hitched, shallow and ragged. The room seemed to pulse around me. A bitter thought rose inside me, sharp enough to wound. I am going to die here, alone, in this palace that never saw me as anything but property. My body curled inward as my strength drained away. My throat tightened until no sound could escape except a trembling whisper, a sound so small even I barely heard it. God, if you're real, where are you? It wasn't a prayer. It was a confession of absolute defeat. A plea from someone who no longer had anything left to offer, not faith, not strength, not even hope. My heart stuttered again. The edges of the room receded into darkness. And in that collapsing moment between life and death, I realized that no earthly salvation was coming for me. If heaven did not intervene, I would not survive the night. I didn't die that night, though part of me wished I had. When the worst of the poisoning passed, my body was left weak, trembling, hollowed out like a shell someone had carved thin from the inside. But survival did not bring comfort. It brought a deeper fear, the knowledge that whatever had happened was not an accident, and it would happen again. My mother's watchful eyes confirmed it every time she entered the room, her gaze cool and assessing, as if she were inspecting a piece of furniture she planned to replace. I felt myself shrinking into silence, moving through the palace like a ghost, terrified that even my breathing might betray me. Days blurred into each other, but one afternoon in February 2017 stands apart in my memory with the clarity of a flame in darkness. I had wandered into the east wing of the palace, a part of the building usually reserved for staff. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I needed space to think, space to breathe, space where my mother's shadow did not fall across my shoulders. I walked briskly, my fingers brushing the intricate patterns carved into the wooden banisters, when I heard a soft thump behind me. Something had fallen. I turned and saw Maria, the Filipino maid who cleaned the upper floors, kneeling on the ground, her hands shaking as she tried to gather scattered papers. Her face was pale with panic, her breaths sharp and uneven. I had seen fear in the eyes of servants before, but this was different. This fear seemed to come from somewhere deeper, like she was afraid for her very soul. Without thinking, I knelt to help her. As I reached for one of the fallen items, my hand froze. It wasn't a piece of paper, it was a small black book. The cover was worn, the corners softened by use, but the gold letters engraved on the front were unmistakable. The Holy Bible. My heart lurched violently in my chest. I had heard about this book, whispered about it, in warnings and condemnations. I had been told it was corrupt, dangerous, a deception crafted to lead believers astray. But this book, this forbidden object, felt strangely alive in my hands, as if warmth radiated from its cover. Maria's face drained of color when she realized I had seen it. She snatched it out of my grasp, clutching it to her chest with trembling fingers. "Please, Princess, please," she whispered in broken Arabic. "Don't tell. Please don't tell." Her eyes filled with tears, and something inside me cracked. I had seen people fear my mother before, fear my father, fear the kingdom's laws, but I had never seen someone fear for their spirit. "Why would you risk having that here?" I whispered. It was a genuine question. I didn't understand. Why would anyone endanger themselves for a book? She hesitated, as if weighing whether the truth might condemn her. Then, with a courage that felt holy, she whispered, "Because without Jesus, life is not life, even in a palace." Her words struck me like a blow to the chest. Here she was, a woman with no status, no wealth, no protection, yet she carried a peace I had never known. Her trembling gradually eased as she spoke about him. "Jesus gives hope," she said quietly. "He gives love, real love, not the kind you earn, the kind he gives freely." A lump formed in my throat. I didn't know why her words shook me, but they did. They rattled something deep inside, something long buried under years of ritual and fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Maria's voice echoed in my mind. Without Jesus, life is not life. What did she mean? Why would she choose a forbidden God over safety, over survival? My thoughts churned until dawn. Over the next few days, I found myself seeking her out intentionally, cautiously. Like a moth circling a flame it fears but cannot resist. She avoided me at first, terrified of punishment. But eventually, in the quiet of an empty laundry room, she allowed me to read a few pages. She opened to the Gospel of Matthew. I don't know how to describe what happened next except to say that the words felt alive. "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." It felt as though Jesus himself was speaking directly to the hollow places inside me, to the cracks my mother's control had carved into my soul. I didn't understand everything, but for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not as a princess, not as a disappointment, not as property, but as a person, a heart God cared to touch. When I returned to my room that night, I whispered into the darkness, "Jesus, if you're real, show me." It was the first prayer I had ever spoken that didn't feel forced, the first prayer I truly meant, and heaven, though silent, felt closer than it ever had before. The night Jesus came to me did not begin with signs or sensations. It began with silence, too much silence, a silence so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I had been feeling sicker for days, the poison lingering in my body like a shadow that refused to leave. My muscles twitched unpredictably. My chest burned each time I inhaled, and a strange numbness crept up my arms whenever my anxiety spiked. But that night, something felt different. Something felt final. I lay on my bed with my eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling, tracing the gold patterns I had memorized since childhood. The chandelier above me swayed ever so slightly, though the air was still. My heartbeat was unsteady, fluttering like a trapped bird inside my chest. My mother's voice drifted from the hallway, cold, distant, instructing someone to prepare a drink for me. My body tensed. I knew what that meant. A fresh wave of dread washed over me, hot and suffocating. The air around me thickened until it felt like I was breathing through cloth. My hands trembled as I pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to fade out alone in this golden tomb. The thought spiraled so violently through my mind that tears forced their way down my cheeks. Jesus, I whispered shakily. If you're real, please, please help me. My voice cracked. It was all I had left. What happened next was so sudden, so impossible, that even as I recount it now, my heart trembles. The temperature in the room shifted, not colder, not warmer, but alive. That is the only word I can use, alive. The air hummed softly, like the vibration of a distant string. The chandelier, which had swayed before, now stilled completely, as though the atmosphere itself bowed in reverence. My breath hitched, my skin prickled. I sat up slowly, instinctively, though I felt half paralyzed with fear and awe. A faint glow appeared in the corner of the room. At first I thought it was a reflection, a trick of the chandelier's crystals. But then it grew brighter, stronger, warmer. The glow expanded until it filled the entire corner with a radiant, living light, a light that did not just illuminate the room, but seemed to illuminate me from the inside. And then he stepped forward. Jesus. Not a dream, not a vision blurred by illness. Him. The atmosphere bent around him like creation itself recognized its maker. His presence filled the room with a peace so profound I felt my entire body release tension I hadn't known I was holding. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt seen completely, utterly seen, in a way no human being had ever seen me. There was no judgment in his gaze, no disgust, no disappointment, only love, pure, consuming, holy love. He moved closer, each step impossibly gentle, as though he was afraid to startle me. My breath trembled as his radiance washed over my trembling form. Tears streamed down my face, not from fear, but from a recognition deeper than memory. I knew him, my soul knew him. Even though I had never been taught to love him, something inside me whispered, "This is the one you've been searching for." He spoke my name. Warda. His voice was the sound of calm waters, of wind through leaves, of everything I had ever longed to hear but never received. It filled me, reverberating through my bones. You are my beloved. My knees buckled and I collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed. No one had ever called me beloved, not once, not even in childhood. The word shattered something inside me and rebuilt it all at once. Jesus knelt beside me, bringing himself to my level. His hand marked with the scar of the nail reached toward me. When his fingers touched my cheek, warmth surged through my skin, flooding my veins, pushing out every trace of poison, every remnant of fear. I gasped as my muscles unclenched, my chest eased, my trembling stopped. The pain in my body vanished so completely I almost didn't recognize the sensation of being whole. You were never meant to be a prisoner, he said softly. You were never meant to be property. I formed you for freedom, for love, for life. A sob tore from my throat. I covered my face with shaking hands, embarrassed by how small and broken I felt before him. But Jesus gently took my wrists and lowered my hands, lifting my chin so my eyes met his again. I have seen every tear you shed, he whispered, every moment you felt alone. You were never alone. His words were not metaphor, they were truth. I felt it, felt his presence in every dark memory, every lonely night, every moment I begged silently for relief. He had been there all along. Lord, my voice trembled. Why me? His smile was so gentle, it unraveled every knot in my soul. Because you are mine. At that moment, the room filled with a wind that had no source. It swept around us, swirling like a veil of light. And I felt something break spiritually, powerfully, as chains I had carried my entire life fell away. Shame dissolved, fear evaporated, identity restored, life reborn. Jesus placed his hand over my heart, and warmth exploded through my chest. My heart, once weak and erratic, beat strong beneath his touch. Warda, he said again, I will never leave you. And what was meant to destroy you, I will use to set you free. As he rose, the light enveloped him once more. My vision blurred with awe, and I reached out instinctively, desperate not to lose him. Stay, I whispered, please. His final words echoed like thunder wrapped in tenderness. I am with you always. Then the light withdrew, leaving my room dim again, but never the same. Never again the same. After Jesus left the room, the air did not return to normal. Nothing did. The silence that followed his departure wasn't empty, it vibrated with a strange, trembling holiness, as though the walls themselves were still echoing with his words. I sat on the floor for a long time, my hands pressed to my chest where he had touched me, feeling the warmth still radiating through my ribs. My breathing was steady, my heart beat strong, my limbs no longer twitched. Even the faint ache that had followed me since childhood, an ache I thought was part of being alive, had disappeared entirely. I felt reborn, but reality, cold and merciless, waited outside my door. I knew my mother was planning something final, something that would not fail as the previous attempts had. And now that I had encountered Jesus, now that I belonged to him, I knew staying silent meant surrendering myself into her hands again. I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Something shifted inside me, a courage I had never known before, like a flame Jesus himself had placed within my bones. I rose from the floor slowly, feeling the strength in my legs, marveling at the steadiness of my steps. For the first time in years, my body did not betray me. I felt protected, guided. The next morning, the palace seemed different. Guards who normally eyed me suspiciously barely glanced in my direction. Doors that were usually locked stood strangely ajar. Corridors once filled with servants were suddenly deserted. It was as if the entire palace had been lulled into an unusual, divinely orchestrated quiet. I moved through the halls with cautious steps, expecting at any moment to hear my mother's cold voice behind me. But each turn felt guided, like invisible hands were leading me forward. And then the miracles began. Maria appeared around the corner of the stairwell, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Princess," she whispered urgently, "you're walking. Your face, something is different." I grabbed her hands tightly. "Maria, I need to leave this place, today." Her breath caught in her throat. "But how?" "The guard's your mother. God will make a way," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Maria stared at me, her fear warring with something else, a spark of hope. Then she nodded. "Follow me." What happened next felt impossible. The servant entrances, normally guarded, were empty. The kitchen passageways, usually alive with clanging dishes and bustling staff, were silent. Maria led me through narrow hallways and down concealed staircases known mostly to workers. Every time we approached a corner, I held my breath, praying silently, and every time, the path was clear. "This is not normal," Maria whispered, trembling. "Someone is clearing the way for you." "Not someone, Jesus." We reached the courtyard wall where the delivery trucks entered. A guard was supposed to stand there at all hours, but today only a steaming cup of tea sat abandoned on a crate beside the gate. In the distance, we could hear raised voices, guards arguing about something near the main entrance, a distraction, perfectly timed. "Princess, go," Maria urged. Tears filled my eyes. "Maria, thank you. You saved me long before today." She shook her head fiercely. "No, Princess, Jesus saved you. I only followed him." I squeezed her hands before slipping through the gate. The moment my feet crossed the threshold, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I was outside. Free air touched my face for the first time without permission. I wrapped my scarf tightly around my head and hurried down the street, staying close to the walls. A car waited at the corner, an old vehicle with peeling paint and tinted windows. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, rolled down the window. "Warda?" His voice was gentle but urgent. I froze. "How do you know my name?" "Maria sent word. Jesus told her he would lead you out today." My breath caught. Another miracle. Another piece placed perfectly into position. I climbed into the back seat, ducking low as the car pulled away from the palace. My hands shook not from fear, but from awe. We drove through Riyadh's busy streets. At every checkpoint, guards were distracted, turning away at the exact moment our car passed. Twice, soldiers abandoned their posts for reasons we couldn't see. Every opportunity for capture dissolved into nothing. It was as if the entire city bowed to a path only God could carve. Hours later, we reached the home of an underground Christian family. When the door opened, a woman embraced me tightly. "Welcome, daughter," she whispered. "You are safe here." For the first time in my life, the word daughter felt real. That night, as I sat in a modest living room lit by a single lamp, I realized something extraordinary. I had escaped not because I was clever or daring or lucky. I escaped because Jesus himself walked me out. Every unlocked door, every absent guard, every perfectly timed distraction, it was all him. What had been meant for my death had become the doorway to my life. And the path forward, though uncertain, no longer terrified me, because I knew who walked it with me. I stayed with the underground Christian family for many weeks, hidden away from the world that had once claimed ownership over me. Their home was small, nothing like the palace I grew up in. Yet, for the first time in my life, I felt spaciousness in my soul. No marble, no gold, no servants rushing to meet expectations. Just warmth, laughter, the sound of worship rising from humble hearts who loved God not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Every morning, I woke with sunlight touching my face instead of dread gripping my stomach. Every night, I fell asleep knowing Jesus watched over me not as a distant judge, but as a savior who had personally pulled me out of death. Slowly, pieces of me I didn't know were missing began to return. I learned to smile without forcing it. I learned to speak without trembling. I learned to breathe without permission. And I learned the scriptures not as rituals, but as living truth. When I read, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted," tears streamed down my face. He had proven it. When I read, "Perfect love casts out fear," something deep inside me healed. His love had cast out a lifetime of terror. And when I read the words of Jesus, "I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly," I realized I was experiencing that abundance already. Not in wealth, not in status, but in freedom, real freedom. One afternoon, the underground believers arranged a small baptism for me. We met in a quiet home, lights dimmed, voices barely above whispers. A plastic tub filled with warm water sat in the living room, surrounded by people whose lives had been transformed just like mine. When I stepped into the water, my heart pounded not with fear, but with joy so fierce it felt like fire spreading through my chest. As I was lowered beneath the surface, I felt the weight of my past, the poison, the lies, the fear, the loneliness sink into that water. And when I rose again, I felt the truth of his promise. If anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. I gasped, not from shock, but from the overwhelming sense of rebirth. I was no longer the princess imprisoned by honor, duty, and expectation. I was a daughter of the King of Kings. After my baptism, I joined the underground ministry. I used my education, my fluency in Arabic, my understanding of the royal world to help other women trapped in silence, in fear, in systems designed to crush them. Some escaped abuse, some escaped forced marriages, some escaped spiritual prisons just like I did. Every time I shared my story with them, they cried not because of the suffering, but because of the one who walked through the fire with me. Jesus was not a religion to them. He wasn't a rule book or a ritual. He was a rescuer, a healer, a friend, and word of his love spread quietly, secretly, through whispers in the night, through coded conversations, through brave believers taking risks so others could live. My own family declared me dead. My name was removed from royal records. My belongings were distributed. My mother pretended I had never existed. For a long time, that truth hurt like an open wound. But Jesus reminded me, "You were never truly theirs. You are mine," he had said. And slowly his voice grew louder than theirs. Today I live far from the palace that once imprisoned me. I no longer hide, not because the danger has faded, but because fear no longer rules me. I have seen the power of the one who breaks chains. I have seen him save me from death. I have seen him orchestrate miracles that no human could explain. I have seen him take a frightened, poisoned princess and turn her into a woman of courage, purpose, and unshakable hope. That is why I share my story. Not to expose my family, not to shame a nation, but to tell you, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this, that Jesus sees you too. Yes, you, the one who cries behind closed doors, the one who feels invisible, the one who thinks they're too broken for God, the one who thinks their past disqualifies them, the one who fears they've gone too far, the one who has prayed, "God, if you're real, where are you? I want you to hear me." He is closer than you think. He is not intimidated by your darkness. He is not disgusted by your wounds. He is not disappointed in your weakness. He steps into the rooms where others have abandoned you. He walks through locked doors. He speaks your name with a tenderness the world cannot imitate. And he offers you the same freedom he gave me. Not a freedom dependent on circumstances, but a freedom that lives inside you, a freedom no one can steal. If he can rescue me from poison, fear, royal pressure, and death itself, he can rescue you from anything you are facing, anything. So let me ask you this gently. What prison is holding your heart right now? And are you willing to let the one who loves you most step inside and break the chains? If you need prayer, type it in the comments. If this testimony touched you, share it. And remember this truth: Jesus Christ is still saving lives today. Mine is proof, and yours could be next.